Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, sorry about that. I just realized that I went off all this time and I didn't have my mic on. So thank you for letting me know. And so I guess I'll start over. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammadin khair al-awwaleen wal akhirin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi وكل من تبع بسنته وتمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And alhamdulillah, gives me great pleasure to have this opportunity to speak to you during this blessed month of Ramadan, and in particular to speak about this important book written by the great Hanbali Imam Sheikh Abdurrahman ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah. The book is entitled al-Khatir, which literally could be translated as hunting for thoughts, hunting for spiritual insights, or hunting for thoughts. In other words, the author, the reason he wrote the book was because he regretted the many different times where he would get a passing thought and he failed to write it down, to jot it down, so they can later benefit from it and perhaps share it with other peoples, so that he can benefit from those some of those particular passing thoughts. I've called it retaining spiritual insights for that particular reason, because really this is the more important part of that. Is that, well, you're going about your day, and then all of a sudden you have this idea, it pops into your head, and you say, "Oh, that's really neat thing, really neat idea. I never thought about that before, and seems to be pretty original." So then you later on in the day you forget it, and so he decided, well, I'm going to start to jot down these things. I'm going to write down these particular thoughts, these passing thoughts that I receive, and then I'll later be able to share them with other people. Now, the book is a very large book, so naturally it's going to be selections from the book. So we're not going to read the entirety of the book. We're only going to be meeting on Wednesdays and on Saturdays, inshallah, for the remainder of the month of Ramadan, and hopefully there'll be some great benefit that comes from this. Naturally, of course, Lampos, we haven't done a live stream in some time, so it may take a little bit of adjusting for me, but I do believe that there's going to be some major benefit that come to all of you to listen in on this particular sort of array of lessons, inshallah, during the blessed month of Ramadan. And hopefully you're having a blessed Ramadan. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase you in your good, and may accept the good that you do, inshallah. So I wanted to begin with, again, coming back to the title itself. I'm actually going to be reading from the book. I'm going to share place on the screen some pages from the book as we read through it. But before doing that, I wanted to first talk about the whole idea of what we call khatir. So you may have heard someone say before, especially if you're a teacher, you go to a masjid, someone says, well, would you be willing to deliver a khatira? And so a khatira, basically, of course, something that appears to you at the moment, in the moment, so you decide to share it, a sort of insight, a spiritual insight that you may have to share with the audience. But it comes from the verb khatara yakhturu, which means to appear or to be cast into the soul, that it's a type of thought. And there are many different types of thoughts according to the Sufis, which I'm going to talk about just in a second. But there's a hadith Qudsi where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَعَدَدْتُ لِعِبَادِيَ الصَّالِحِينَ مَا لَا عَيْنٌ رَأَتْ وَلَا أُذُنٌ سَمِعَتْ وَلَا خَطَرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ, that I have prepared for my righteous servants what no eye has seen, what no ears ever heard, and has never appeared to the heart, meaning to the mind of a human being, right? So khatara is part of that hadith, so she understand what's meant by khatar. And the Sufis say that there are 4 different types of khawatir, right? So of these different thoughts or sort of impulses that enter into the human soul. 2 of them are fixed, in other words, they don't fluctuate, and 2 others, they fluctuate. So the 2 that don't fluctuate is what they call al-Khatir al-Rabbani and the Khatir al-Nafsani, right? In other words, there's a thought which originates from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah casts into the soul a particular thought, an impulse to do something, and of course there's always going to be something good. and that remains fixed. So as an individual gets this idea, let's say for instance, it's something like, okay, give charity. You should give. You should give $1,000. You should give $5,000. And so and that particular resolve remains with you, and so that's usually the way that you detect it as being from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. That it doesn't, that you don't waver, you don't fluctuate. The once you have that resolve, it remains with you. But of course, originally the idea was something that appeared at that moment. It wasn't something that you had planned prior to that particular moment. And then you have the nafsani, which originates from the nafs, the soul, the ego, right? Al-Khatir nafsani. And al-Khatir nafsani, of course, like as is as is explained, as it's translated to be, it is something that typically that one gets the urge to do. You get the idea to this particular thing, but typically one of the ways that you are able to detect whether or not it is coming from your own nafs, your own ego, your own sort of your whim, is that you don't think about the consequences of your actions, right? You do it and you feel completely comfortable about it, and you're not thinking about the consequences of it, right? Because of course you can't trust the nafs, right? Then you have the other two, which we said are fluctuate. They're mutaraddidan, right? So they're khatiran and mutaraddidan. There's a khatir al-malaki and khatir al-shaytani. This is the thought of the angelic impulse or angelic thought, which in the angels, they order you only to do things that are good. But the difference with the khatir al-malaki is that you may have the impulse to do the good thing, but you may, feel, okay, but maybe I shouldn't do it, right? But if you increase your dhikr of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, then that dhikr actually makes it more firm, and then eventually you're able to carry out that particular act. And then finally, the khatir shaitani, the satanic impulse or the satanic thought, is the one that of course originates from shaitan, right? And of course, in shaitan, like I said, it is a fluctuating thought. There's an idea. It comes to you, but it may change. Shaitan tells you to do something which is evil, and you may be inclined to do it, but then you decide not to do it. And with shaitan, his particular goal is to make you commit any type of sin. So he doesn't care if you abandon one sin to do another, right? You say, okay, well, instead of sleeping with a woman, you should go watch porn, right? Shaitan, that's shaitan, right? Because you'll say to yourself, oh, at least this is not as bad as actually sleeping with a woman who's not my wife, right? So that's the khatir shaitani. So the book, coming back to the book of the author, Sheikh Abdullah bin Jawzi, that he calls it khatir, Sayd al-Khatir, right? And so the word Sayd, as mentioned before, it means to hunt, right? So this idea is that, okay, well, I'm waiting for the opportunity to actually shoot at this particular prey, and shoot at my prey and catch it, and then I'll retain it, I'll write it down, bil kitab, right? So for instance, so this is the beginning, the introduction to his book. So he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وبه المستعان وعليه التكلان. قال الشيخ الإمام العالم أبو الفرج عبد الرحمن بن علي بن محمد بن جوزي رحمه الله رحمة الله عليه. الحمد لله حمدا يبلغ رضاه، وصلى الله على أشرف من اشتبع، وعلى من صاحبه ووالاه، وسلم تسليما لا يجرك منتهى. So it begins by saying, all praise belongs to Allah, a type of praise which reaches his satisfaction. And may salutations be upon the most noble of those he has chosen, and upon his companions and those who are allies of his, and may peace be upon him, a type of peace whose end never whose end never comes. The end never comes. La yudraku muntaha. Its sort of limit is never reached. لما كانت الخواطر تجول في تصفه أشياء تعرضها ثم تعرض عنها فتذهب، كان من أولى الأمور حفظ ما يخطر لكي لا ينسى. وقد قال عليه الصلاة والسلام قيد العلم بالكتاب. So it says, so since thoughts are things that wander, right? تجول في تصفحه أشياء, right? So the thoughts are things that wander within the mind of the person. And of course, the ta'rid, sometimes they appear, then other times they turn away, they disappear, they go away. So since this is the nature of thoughts, then it is among the most deserving of affairs that one preserve whatever appears to one's mind a benefit, so that those things are not forgotten. And so then he quotes the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, "Qayyid al-ilma bil-kitab," retain knowledge with writing. Retain knowledge in writing. So again, he starts by mentioning this, that this is something, a good practice for us to do. So all of us we have these moments of insight that we perhaps should write them down and later on, act upon them, and then also share them with others we know. And then he says, وَكَمْ قَدْ خَطَرَ لِي شَيْءٌ فَأَتَشَاغَرُ عَنْ إِثْبَاتِهِ فَيَذْهَبُ فَأَتَأَسَّفُ عَلَيْهِ. He says that how many times it has happened. I mean, it has happened quite often, right? That something would appear to my mind, and then all of a sudden I get distracted away from writing it down. I don't retain that information, right? So something distracts me and keeps me from writing it down, recording it, and then I regret not missing the opportunity to benefit from that thought. ورأيت من نفسي أنني كلما فتحت بصر تفكري سنح له من عجائب الغيب ما لم يكن في حساب فانثار عليه من كثيب التفهيم ما لا يجوز تفريط فيه فجعلت هذا الكتاب قيدا للصيد الخاطر. Right. So he says, as a result of that, I've made it, or I've decided that كلما فتحت بصر, that every time I noticed that every time that I would start to think about something, or every time I'm in thought, that some particular amazing idea would appear, which I didn't expect would appear, but then after time goes by, negligence leads to that thing being forgotten. And so as a result of this, I composed this book as a way to fetter or to record the things, the ideas or the thoughts that I am hunting for, right? So this, of course, is introduction. So he's letting you know, okay, why he writes the book. So he said, well, so this happened too many times. You know what? I'm going to extract great benefit from this. Then the next section is called في سبب عودة الغفلة والقسوة إلى القلب بعد انقضاء الموعظة. Right. So next he wants to talk about why is it that when people hear lectures, they hear admonitions, they hear some type of spiritual insight, that people quickly resort back to heedlessness? And why is it that people's hearts become hard after they hear things that impress them, right? First and foremost. And so he says, قد يعرض عند سماع المواعظ للسامع يقظة فإذا انفصل عن مجلس الذكر عادة قسوته والغفلة. So it says, so sometimes it happens that when someone is listening to a lecture, that a state of awakeness appears over that person. But the moment the assembly of dhikr, it stops, the person's original state returns, which is a state of hard-heartedness and heedlessness. فتدبرت السبب في ذلك فعرفته ثم رأيت الناس يتفاوتون في ذلك. So then I reflected upon, okay, why is this that happen? So I reflected and I thought about, okay, why is it this that happens? And then I realized that I understood why it happens. And as a result of it, I noticed that there actually were people are varying levels, varying degrees with respect to the matter of why they become heedless or return to heedlessness after hearing something which is so beneficial for the soul. Now, of course, we are in the month of Ramadan, and the month of Ramadan teaches us the importance of us seeking that which is most important, which is the reward in the hereafter, closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That the fast, of course, has physical benefits, but it's really about the spiritual benefits. This is what we're concerned with. We're concerned with the spiritual benefits of the fast, and because that is what it lives on after we pass away. As a hadith that the Prophet mentioned, that every time a person dies, they only leave behind three things. One is a knowledge that people benefit from. Secondly, is a sadaqah jariyah, a sort of a flowing or continuous charity. And then thirdly, waladun salihun yad'u lah, a righteous child that prays for them, right? So this is all that you leave this world with, and that's the most important thing. And so here's, okay, well, people of different states, you hear the lecture, you hear the admonition, you hear the scolding, perhaps even, right? So what happens? So people are different states. فحالة العامة أن القلب لا يكون على صفته من يقظة عند سماع موعظة وبعدها لسببين. So he said that two fundamental reasons why people's hearts don't remain in the state of awareness that they are when they first hear some type of special spiritual insight. أحدهما أن المواعظ كالسياط والسياط لا تؤلم بعد انقضائها إلامها وقت وقوعها. He said the first reason is because lectures are like whips, right? So when you're hit with the whip, now of course you remember the pain it strikes you at that moment, and so the pain that you feel at the moment it strikes you is not the same as it is once it's over, right? So once okay, whip, oh, super, it hurts at that moment, and then now it starts to subside. So that's the first reason why people become heedless. And then he said ثاني أن حالة سماع المواعظ يكون الإنسان فيها مزاح العلة قد تخلى بجسمه وفكره عن أسباب الدنيا وأنصت بحضور قلبه فإذا عاد إلى الشواغل استجذبته بآفاتها فكيف يصح أن يكون كما كان. So the second reason is that the state of the person, or the state of hearing spiritual insights, at that particular moment when this happens, the individual is free of any distractions, right? So first he said, okay, it's because it's like a whip. They said second, because at that moment you hear that you are free of distractions, you're very focused, right? You're focused, your heart is in it, your ears are in it, everything is part of it. So he said, Tabarakallah, that was an incredible lecture, incredible talk, incredible lesson today, right? So it's like at that moment, it's like, well, you're free of distractions, right? Like most of us are in Ramadan, alhamdulillah, especially on the weekends. So it's like, well, and so, but then once the distractions return, then naturally it takes us back into the state of ghafla, a state of heedlessness. And this is a state of the entire of all humanity, that no one escapes this. Everyone falls into this situation. إلا أن أرباب يقظة يتفاوتون في بقاء الأثر. Except that those who are awake, those who are alert, they are of differing degrees of wakefulness with respect to the retention of the effects of that spiritual lesson. فمنهم من يعزم بلا تردد ويمضي من غير التفات فلو توقف بهم ركب الطبع لضجوا كما قال حنظلة عن نفسه نافق حنظلة. Right? So among them are those who have resolve, and they themselves do not hesitate, and they act right away, immediately. Once they hear the lesson, they hear the spiritual insight, they take it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created their souls in such a way where they themselves, they can immediately incorporate this particular lesson into their lives, and even to the extent that if at any particular moment they feel that their nature is sort of changing, right, and they're becoming heedless, they clamor as a result of it, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made their anfus, their souls of this particular state, in the same way that Hanzala al-Usaydi, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the companion, said, Nafaqa Hanzala, oh Ya Rasulullah, Hanzala is guilty of hypocrisy. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked Hanzala, and how so? How is that, Hanzala? He said, Ya Rasulullah, when we're with you, and we hear the mau'idah, we hear the spiritual insights, we hear the lectures, we hear everything that we need to do in order to get success in the hereafter. It's like we see it right with our eyes. It's like everything's right there before us, and it's completely 100% real. But the moment we leave, we find ourselves falling back into heedlessness, right? And so the Prophet responds to Alhamdulillah, tells him that if you were to remain upon this state, then the angels would come and they would shake your hands as you walk down the roads, right? So this is, again, the state that many people seek. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a taste of that. Then he goes on, وَمِنْهُمْ أَقْوَامٌ يَمِيلُ بِهِمْ الطَّبْعُ إِلَى غَفْلَةِ أَحْيَانًا ويدعوهم ما تقدم من مواعظ إلى عمل أحيانا فهم كالسنبلة تميلها الرياح. So the first state is the individual, of course, they become, they're disciplined, right? The first people are disciplined people. They hear the spiritual insight, they put it into practice immediately, and they never stop, right, doing it. A second type of person is one who hears it and their soul or their nature inclines them towards heedlessness sometimes. Sometimes they fall into ghafla, and so those particular moments of spiritual insight and lecture, they they inspire them to do good works sometimes. Excuse me. And then at other times they abandon the works. And so he said that these are like the sumbura. There's like the like the like a crop of wheat or something which is being hit by the winds. The winds move them, and the stalks, right? Like, I'm sorry, this word I was looking for, stalk, like the stalks of wheat, being moved by the winds. So in other words, wherever the wind pushes you, that's where you go. If the wind pushes you towards good, you do the good. If the wind pushes you away from good, then you abandon the good. And so then lastly, he said, وَأَقْوَامٌ لَا يَأْثِرُ فِيهِمْ إِلَّا بِمِقْدَارِ سَمَاعِهِ كَمَاءٍ دَحْرَجْتَهُ عَلَى صَفْوَانٍ. And then there's a third type of person, and we ask Allah that He protect us from being this type of person. He says, these are people that no effect comes to them from the spiritual insights that they hear. It's just like they just hear it and that's it. And it's like water that is pouring on the top of a smooth rock, right? And the water just flows right off, right? So there's, of course, the state that we don't want to be in naturally. So then after this, he talks about, okay, all right, well, what is it? So if, okay, distraction happens, we are led into heedlessness. And we led into heedlessness either one because when we first hear the spiritual insight, then it's like a whip, right? And so it affects us immediately, but then we become sort of lax afterwards, and then secondly, he says, is because, fundamentally, the second reason was basically that that we are free, right? And you're free of any distraction. This is what leads you to actually pay attention to the insight. But then once the distractions return, then you go back to your heedlessness, right? But he says, okay, what are the things from the dunya that attracts us and makes us heedless, right? So الطبع بين جواذب الدنيا وذكر الآخرة, right? So he talk about, okay, the human nature, the nature of the human being, the nature of the human soul, between the things that attract one to the dunya and remembrance of the hereafter, right? So جواذب الطبع إلى الدنيا كثيرة. So the things that actually gravitate us towards the dunya are many. ثم هي من داخل. Then he says, and those things that attract us towards the dunya are things that are internal to ourselves, our souls. وذكر الآخرة أمر خارج عن الطبع من خارج. And the thing, remembrance of the hereafter, is something, a matter that is external to our internal nature, right? In other words, he basically saying that, okay, well, if we want dunya because we are being sort of, it's part of who we are, that we've been wired to want dunya, right? But the akhirah is something external to our internal state. And so this itself makes it even much more of a challenge, right? Because we want something that our souls are not immediately attracted to. Right? So how do you make your souls attracted to those things? So he said, وَرُبَّمَا ظَنَّ مَنْ لَا عِلْمَ لَهُ أَنَّ جَوَاذِبَ الْآخِرَةِ أَقْوَى لِمَا يَسْمَعُ مِنَ وَعِيدِ فِي الْقُرْآنِ. He said, it sometimes happens that those who have no knowledge, they think that the things that attract one to the hereafter are actually stronger because of the threats he finds or hears mentioned in the Quran. Well, he said, but this is not so. This is not the case, right? So in other words, someone may assume, okay, well, if I hear about the hellfire, then that's probably one going to make me not want to go to the hellfire. And said, sure, you don't want to go to the hellfire. No one wants to go to the hellfire, but how immediate and how imminent is the danger of the hellfire, right, to the average one of us? Right? It's not immediate. It's not imminent at all, right, unless you're on your deathbed, right? وليس كذلك لأن مثل الطبع في ميله إلى الدنيا كالماء الجاري فإنه يطلب الهبوط وإنما رفعه إلى فوق يحتاج إلى تكلف ولهذا أجاب معاون الشرع بالترغيب والترهيب يقوي جند العقل. So it says, because the reason, so this is not the case. It is not the case that the things that attract ones for the hereafter are stronger than the things that attract us to this world, because the similitude of one's nature and its inclination towards the dunya is like running water. It's like running water. So what happens to water? What does water do? Water, it actually pursues a decline, right? In other words, water runs downhill, right? It runs downhill. And if you want water to be elevated, it's going to require a certain amount of effort and energy in order to get it to go up the hill, right? So basically, he said that this is what the soul is like. The soul is like running water. The soul goes down, and in order to get the soul to go up, you have to push hard. You have to work hard to get it to go up. And for this particular reason, he says the aids of the revealed law, they respond to this particular challenge by encouraging us and discouraging us in such a way that it strengthens the forces of the intellect, forces of aql, jundul aql, or the soldier, or the soldier of the intellect, or the forces of the intellect. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell us, if you do this, you get this reward. You could do this one good deed, you'll get 10 good deeds. You do some good deeds, you get 700 good deeds for. And some good deeds, there's no limit to how many rewards you get for those good deeds. Allah tells you about Jannah. He tells you about the water of Jannah. Talk about the things that you drink in Jannah. There's wine, there's honey, there's milk, there's, etc., and other types of delights that I mentioned about Jannah. In Tarhib, he tells you about the type of drinks that exist in the hellfire, right? What sort of things do people drink in the hellfire? Extremely cold drinks, which, ghislin and others, which some describe blood and pus and other just very nasty, and gross things that you're told that and then you don't have a good environment, that is sometimes too hot, sometimes it's too cold. You don't have i'tidal, a sort of moderate temperature in Jahannam, right? So targhib with tarhib. So why does Allah do that? In order to strengthen the force of the intellect, right? Because the human being is aql, and we are shahwa, that we are intellect and we are lust, right? And in order to strengthen, we're unlike the animals, so we're like the angels in that we have rationality, right? And so, but the angels don't have lust. We're like the lower animals in that we have lust, but they don't have aql, right? So the human being is the only creature that has this one characteristic we call sabr, which is temperance, or we can call patience, right? Why? Because when you're sick, what do? You go to the doctor to see the doctor, and the doctor recommends or prescribes for you some medicine. You don't really want to drink the medicine, right? Because why? Because your nature doesn't sort of approve of it. It doesn't, find it to be tasty, right? But your aql says, you know what? In order for me to get better and improve, I have to take this medicine, or I have to eat well, I have to eat better, I have to exercise more. So that's what the aql does. So the aql tells us to do that. So the things that will strengthen the forces of the aql, are given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger in the Quran and in the Sunnah, right? So again, the things that attract us to the dunya are internal, right? And they are stronger than the things that attract you to the hereafter. And for that reason, we have to strengthen the forces of the aql, of the intellect. This is why, of course, one of the very first commands was Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. So then the author goes, فأما الطبع فجواذبه كثيرة وليس العجب أن يغلب إنما العجب أن يغلب. Right. So it says, so as for one's nature, right? So human nature, right? The things that attract, or the things which are part of our nature, which attract us to the dunya, are many, as mentioned before. So it's no wonder that our nature gets the best of us and it conquers us. He says that that's not a wonder. That's nothing to be amazed about when our nafs, it gets the best of us. What is amazing is that we actually conquer our nafs. That is something to be amazed about, not the opposite. Because again, the nafs inclines towards things which the body needs, or even perhaps the soul needs. But of course, we are supposed to do things in moderation, and there are limits, there are boundaries. But when we gain mastery over the nafs, that actually itself is actually something better. It actually is something, a cause for wonderment, when we find people who have good control, good self-control, right? Because the human being is a complex of thoughts, of emotions, of passion, right? And we have to begin with thoughts, right? So here, this is fundamentally what the author is doing. He said the khawatir is the point of beginning. The point, in other words, we have to get the right thoughts in our heads. And you're not going to get the right thoughts in your head if you're spending your time listening to a lot of garbage, listening to garbage music, looking at garbage television, listening to garbage talk, reading garbage talk online, right? So you're going to get the bad thoughts, the thoughts which will going to eventually lead to impulses, we're going to lead to urges, we're going to lead to resolve to do something, and then they're going to materialize in the world. And when they materialize, it's going to be catastrophic for the soul, and perhaps for you and for some other person, some innocent person, poor person in this world. So the next section he entitles, or rather it is entitled, it's unclear at this moment if these are the titles he gave. I don't think that he gave them these titles, but rather the publisher put them there, or maybe one of the manuscripts have these titles for each fasl. وفي أن النظر في العواقب يورث السلامة. So what this translates as is considering the outcomes, or considering outcomes, it produces safety. It leads to safety. So considering the outcome before we do things, that is what leads to safety. Right? Because remember before, the Khatir al-Nafsani doesn't think about awaqib. Right? In other words, when it comes from the nafs itself, right, it just wants to get what it wants at that moment. Right? It doesn't need inspiration from shaitan in order to do that. We're already wired to do that. We're hungry, we want to eat. Right? When we're thirsty, we want to drink. Right? We want to sexual gratification. We look for sexual gratification, right? So that's the way we are created. We are wired, right, to do that. But when we think about the outcomes, what will be the consequences of those actions, then we're talking about safety. So he says, "Man ayana bi'ayn basiratihi tanahi al-umuri fi bidayatiha nara khayraha wa najab min sharriha." Said whoever is able to see with the eye of deep insight the limits or the final stages of matters at the beginning, right? In other words, if you're able to see what the end looks like at the start, right? Nada khayraha, then you shall achieve the good of those things, wanajab min sharriha, and you will be safe from the bad outcome of those things, or the evil effect of those things, right? So beginning understanding, whereas Ibn Ashur said, وَيُوقِفُ الْأُمُورَ حَتَّى يَعْلَمَ مَا اللَّهُ فِيهِنَّ بِهِ قَدْ حَكَمَ. And we are to stop all things until we have knowledge, of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about those things, right? So we look for well, I don't know if this is halal or haram, I'm going to do it anyway. No, we should, of course, the individual who's seeking spiritual enlightenment, right, is not someone who just simply is concerned with halal and haram, right? Is haram, I'm going to do it, right? But even the halal can be a pathway to evil, and this is why we have in usul al-fiqh the principle of sadd al-dara'i, barring the means, right? So anyone who is able to see with the eye of deep insight the ends of all affairs at their beginnings, then he shall achieve their good and he will be safe from their evil. وما لم يرى العواقب غلب عليه الحس فعاد عليه بالألم ما طلب منه السلامة وبالنصب ما رجا منه الراحة. And whoever does not see the outcomes, then such a person will be led by sensory perception. In other words, your senses, they rule you. You'll be ruled by your senses. And then فَعَادَ عَلَيْهِ بِالْأَلَمِ, and that itself will lead to great pain and things that one is seeking safety from, and will lead to great fatigue in what one hopes to achieve comfort from. وَبَيَانُ هَذَا فِي الْمُسْتَقْبَلِ يَتَبَيَّنُ بِذِكْرِ الْمَاضِي. He said, and the clarification, the clarity of this in the future, it is clarified by making or recalling what happened in the past. In other words, if you already had experience, then you say, well, what if I've already done this and this was the outcome, then what about the future, right? So I should know what the future looked like based upon what the past looks like. Then he says, وَهُوَ أَنَّكَ لَا تَخْلُ أَن تَكُونَ عَصَيْتَ اللَّهَ فِي عُمْرِكَ أَوْ عَطَعْتَهُ فَأَيْنَ لَذَّةُ مَعْصِيَتِكَ وَأَيْنَ تَعَبُ بِطَاعَتِكَ هَيْهَاتَ رَحَلَ كُلٌّ بِمَا فِيهِ. So he says, when you consider the fact that there's no way for anyone to avoid the fact that sometime in your life you've disobeyed Allah, but also no one can deny that you have obeyed Allah, right, in certain instances as well. But then he says, okay, well, where is the delight or the pleasure of the sin that you committed? Is it still with you? No. If something, it passed, it's already gone, right? And where is the fatigue that came to you from your obedience? It's gone as well, right? We fulfill things. You fast Ramadan and then you pray Taraweeh. Right now, it's like, okay, this is hard. But then once it's over, it's like, oh man, mashallah. Yeah. So he says, hey, hata. He said, rahala kullu ma bima fihi. In other words, so all of these things have gone and all they contain, they already passed. So in other words, he's saying that if you want to know what the future looks like, just reflect upon the past. Reflect upon that. Later dhunuba idha takhallat khallat. He said, I wish that when sins are committed, they don't leave behind some trace or some effect. Right? So I wish that was the case. In other words, that when you commit sin, that they don't have an impact on the heart, right? They don't leave some effect on us in the future. وأزيد في هذا بيانا وأزيد في هذا بيانا. So he says مثل ساعة الموت وأزيدك في هذا بيانا. So in other words, I'm give you another one to increase the clarity to this particular point. So مثل ساعة الموت. He said, okay, imagine the moment of death coming to you. وانظر إلى مرارة الحسرات على تفريطي. He said that you should consider the bitterness of regret that will come to you or you experience in light of your neglect at that moment of death. ولا أقول كيف تغلب حلاوة اللذات لأن حلاوة اللذات استحالت حنظرا فبقيت مرارة الأسى بلا مقاوم. It says, I'm not saying to you, how are you going to overcome the sweetness of the pleasures that you experiences? Why? Because the sweetness of the pleasures you experiences, they now have been transformed to something bitter. فَبَقِيَتْ مَرَارَةُ الْأَسَى. So the only thing that will remain at the moment is the bitterness of regret, بِلَا مُقَاوِمٍ, with no one to resist, right, that regret at that moment. أَتُرَاكَ مَا عَلِمْتَ أَنَّ الْأَمْرَ بِأَوَاقِبِهِ. He said, don't you realize that matters are determined by their ends, by their consequences? فراقب العواقب تسلم ولا تمل مع هوى الحس فتندم. He said, so you should observe and be very concerned about the outcomes. If you do so, you will be safe. And do not incline along with the lusts of the senses, resulting in your regret. It result in your regret. This is maybe one more page, 1 or 2 more pages, inshallah. So he says here, فَصْلٌ فِي أَنَّ حَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. So this, of course, is something known, right? So this section is entitled that or it's a section concerning the fact that the lower life is a matter, an illusory place of enjoyment, right? In other words, it's delusion. It's a matter of delusion, right? من تفكر في عواقب الدنيا أخذ الحذر ومن أيقن بطول الطريق تأهب للسفر. So, and of course, this rhymes. من تفكر, whoever thinks about the consequences or the ends, rather, of the dunya, he will take caution. And whoever is certain about the length or the lengthiness of the path, he will prepare for the journey. And it basically said that, okay, if you're really serious about rectifying your soul, if you're really, really serious about rectifying your soul, then you will prepare from now, because the journey is long. It's not necessarily long because you're going to live long, but it's long because trying to gain mastery over yourself is going to take a long time, especially if you already had bad habits. If you already had bad habits. وَمَا أَعْجَبَ أَمْرَكَ يَا مَنْ يُوقِنُ بِأَمْرٍ ثُمَّ يَنْسَاهُ وَيَتَحَقَّقُ ضَرَرَ حَالٍ ثُمَّ يَخْشَاهُ وَتَخْشَى النَّاسَ وَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَنْ تَخْشَى. He said, how amazing is your affair? In other words, you're like just you caused me wonder. See, he's talking about himself too, right? He's talking about the reader. What an amazing affair that you are in. You are one of those who is certain of something, and then you forget about it. Of course, what is it we're certain of? We're certain of death, first and foremost. And of course, certainty about the hereafter may be a little bit, this is fundamentally the problem. Right? They say, but we're certain of death. We're certain of death. So you are certain. So how amazing are you? How amazing is your affair that you are certain of something and then you forget it. And then you also realize that a particular situation will harm you, and then you still allow for it to harm you. And you fear the people when Allah is most deserving of being feared. تغلبك نفسك على ما تظن ولا تغلبها على ما تستيقن. So it says, your nafs, your soul, it conquers you with respect to something you think will happen. But you do not conquer it with regard to what you are certain will happen. Pretty deep stuff. So in other words, in some ways, this is sort of similar to a verse from the Hikam of Ibn Ata'illah, where he says, اجتهادك فيما ضمن لك وتقصيرك فيما طلب منك وطلب منك دليل على انتماس البصيرة منك. Right? In other words, so you're struggling, you're striving in what has been guaranteed for you, and your negligence about what has been requested of you is an evidence or is proof that your inner eye has become eclipsed, right? In other words, people pursue the dunya. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us that a risk is madmoon, it is guaranteed. You're going to get your risk in this life. And people go into overdrive and seeking and running after the dunya. So it says your ijtihad, your diligence with respect to seeking out something which is already guaranteed, and your falling short or your negligence regarding something that Allah asks you to do is a sign that your heart is sick, sign that your heart or the basira has been erased, right, from your heart, the inner insight, right, has been erased from your heart. So when he says your soul, it conquers you with respect to what you think, and you do not conquer it with respect to what you are certain. In other words, you think you're going to get rich. You think you're going to live long. You think you're going to remain healthy, right? But we are certain that death is eventually going to come. We're also certain that sickness will come, right? But our focus is on the things that we believe will happen. We think will happen, but there's no certainty about it, but we would do better to conquer our souls with respect to the things that we're certain of, which is death. And if we're certain of that, then we would do everything we can to prepare for what comes after death. Then he says, A'jabul ajaib, sururuka bigururik, wa sahbuka fi lahwik, amma qad khubiya lak. Says that in the most wondrous of all wonderful things, right, is your happiness or your delight with respect to your delusion. So your delight with respect to your delusion. Says the most amazing of all amazing things is that you're happy with respect to your delusion. And also, sahwuka fi lahwik, your heedlessness with respect to your amusement, amma qad khubiya lak, your amusement from what has been hidden from you, hidden away for you. تبتر بصحتك وتنسى دنو والسقم. Says that you are deluded by good health and you forget that sickness is close, is nearby. وتفرح بعافيتك غافلا عن قرب الألم. That you are happy with your well-being while being heedless of the closeness of pain, which will come to you, right? So we see people in pain, we see people suffering, we see people with handicaps, will be people in disadvantageous situations. The Prophet, he directed us to say, Alhamdulillah alladhi afana mimma ibtalahu wa faddalana ala kathira min khalaqahu tafdila. That praise be to Allah from who did not try us, or rather he removed from us the tribulation that he gave to these people and preferred us over many of the things or many of the creatures that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. Right. So he says that you are happy with your well-being, but heedless of the fact that pain is near. Who knows when the musibah will happen? Who knows when an affliction is going to come to you? No one knows. لَقَدْ أَرَاكَ مَصْرَعُ خَيْرِكَ مَصْرَعَكَ. He says, so the death of other than you has, araka masra ghayrika masra'ak. The death of others actually shows you your own death, right? In other words, when you see others die, it should remind you of your own death. But people quite often don't think about that. You go to cemeteries and you go to janazas, and Muslims are standing around the grave and they're laughing and laughing, laughing. But it says that the fall or the downfall of others is a sign of your own downfall. That should be the lesson that you learn. That if that person could fall down, I could fall down, or I will fall down. That person will die, I'm going to die too. And am I ready to go? وَأَبْدَى مَضْجَعُ سِوَاكَ قَبْلَ الْمَمَاتِ مَضْجَعَكَ. So and again the situation, the state of the person, of another person, right, before that person's death, also it gives us information about our own condition, right? وَقَدْ شَغَلَكَ نَيْلُ لَذَّاتِكَ عَنْ ذِكْرِ خَرَابِ ذَاتِكَ. Right? So in other words, the pursuit of our own pleasures has distracted us from remembering that our own self is going to come to an end. Our own self will disappear. That our own self will die. Right? In other words, that we involve and we immerse in our ladhat and our pleasures. And that in itself, it makes us forget of the fact that that day is coming eventually. It's coming soon. We don't know. And so then he quotes some poetry. He said, كأنك لم تسمع بأخبار من مضى ولم ترى في الباقين ما يصنع الدهر فإن كنت لا تدري فتلك ديارهم محاها مجال الريح بعدك والقبر. He said, it seems like you have not heard of the news of those who went before you, and you see among those who remain what time does to them. فَإِن كُنْتَ لَا تَدْرِي فَتِلْكَ دِيَارُهُمْ. So if you don't know, then these are their homes. What happened to their homes? The wind, right, erased the signs of their homes. Mahaha majal rihi ba'daka wal qabru, right? So the winds and the graves, they have sort of removed all of the signs or traces of their existence, right, in this world. And then finally, with the last one, في أن سلامة رهينة بتجنب مواضع الفتن. So this concerns the fact that safety is contingent upon the avoidance of the places of fitna, avoiding the places where fitna exists. So he says, من قارب الفتنة بعدت عنه السلامة. Whoever becomes close to fitna, safety is far away from him. ومن ادعى الصبر وكل إلى نفسه. So, and whoever claims a state of sabr, then he will be left to his own devices. Excuse me. He'll be left to depend on himself. In other words, you're not supposed to claim a station with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm a patient person. I'm unlike those people who are impatient. I'm a patient person. So anyone who claims patience, so in other words, what he says, when remain free of the places of fitna. So in other words, this is a source of fitna, to make claims about your spiritual state. من ادعى الصبر وكل إلى نفسه ورب نظرة لم تناظر. And many a glance did not produce any benefit. Of course, you look at something and then it's haram and harms you. وأحق الأشياء بالضبط وقهر اللسان والعين. And it says the most deserving of things of discipline and subdual are the tongue and the eye. They say that the eye is an inroad to the heart. Of course, the tongue itself is a source of salvation or damnation. So the tongue and the eye. Of course, if the eye is the inroad to the heart, then the heart, of course, you crave for certain things that you don't, or you shouldn't want to crave for, right? But the tongue itself is a weapon for or against you, because your salvation is with La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, right? That's it. That's your salvation, right? But the rejection of that also, that La yakhruju ahadu min al-imani illa bi juhudi ma adkhalahu fihi. As Imam al-Tahawi says, that no person departs from iman except by the rejection of what brought him into it. So if you reject the shahadatain, then of course you are determining yourself to be on the path of hell. Not that you're going to hell. There's always opportunity. As long as you're alive, you can come back. The door to Allah's mercy remains open as long as you're alive. فإياك أن تضطر بعزمك على ترك الهوى مع مقاربة الفتنة. So it says, beware to be deluded by your decision to abandon your lust while being in proximity to fitna. You could kind of think, a mundane example of this could be something like, okay, if I decided yesterday that I'm no longer going to smoke cigarettes, for instance, and then I go and spend time in the presence of people who smoke cigarettes. All right, so it's like, well, what do you think is going to happen for most the average person? Most people are not strong enough, especially that close to you deciding to stop. You give up, right? You're a sin. Or you say, I'm going to stop committing zina. That's my decision, but I'm going to the club tonight anyway. I'm going to go to the club anyway, right? فإن الهوى إن الهوى مكايد or مكايد. He said the lust itself is treacherous. Lust is treacherous. وكم من شجاع في صف الحرب اغتيل فأتاه ما لم يحتسب مما يأنف النظر إليه. He said, how many brave men on the battleground during warfare were assassinated? And things that he finds displeasure with came to him without his expectation. In other words, you may be a good fighter, you may be brave, but someone can assassinate you. Somebody, just like an arrow, bow and arrow, you get shot. In other words, stay away from the places of fitna. Then he said, وَذْكُرْ حَمْزَةَ مَعَ وَحْشِي. He said, remember Hamza with Wahshi. If you remember Hamza, of course, the Prophet's uncle, radiallahu an, Asadullah, the lion of God, right? We know that he was known for being very strong and a good fighter, right? He was a great strength for Islam when he became Muslim, as we know, right? But what happened? Wahshi, during Uhud, he assassinated him. He assassinated him. For he said, فَتَبَصَّرْ وَلَا تَشِّمْ كُلَّ بَرْقٍ رُبَّ بَرْقٍ فِيهِ صَوَائِقُ حَيٍّ. He said, so reflect and do not respond to every flash of lightning, because many flashes of lightning contain thunderbolts of one's death or thunderbolts of one's demise. وَاغْضُضِ الطَّرَفَ تَسْتَرِحْ مِنْ غَرَامٍ تُكْتَسَى فِيهِ ثَوْبُ ذَلٍّ وَشَيْنٍ. Said, lower the gaze, you will become free or find rest from any fine or any sort of burden that comes to you, and you shall be adorned with the attire of humiliation and disgrace, right? I mean, if you don't lower your gaze, right? فبلاء الفتاة موافقة النفس وبدء الهوى طموح العين. Says, so the tribulation of the young person, or the tribulation of the man, is being in conformity with his nafs. And the start of lust is the ambition, which is in the eye. In other words, like I said, the eye is the gateway to the heart. The eye is the gateway to the heart. So anyway, so we'll stop there for today. And inshallah, on Saturday at 3 o'clock, we'll resume the reading of the Imam's Sayyid al-Khatir. I can take a couple of questions if anyone that may have any. If not, then we can conclude right away, inshallah.